This is Jim Semivan, and you are listening to That UFO Podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. My name is Andy, and we've got a breakdown to round off the month of October. May fit in another one before at the end of October, but likely be well into November. Joining me to provide commentary, analysis, feedback, and all that good stuff is Dan. Welcome.
Hi, it's nice to stop my globetrotting for a minute and take a breath and sit down with you and have a chat about what's been going on.
Yeah, just for a minute or two before you head back off again. Around the Americas, as they call them. It's been a few weeks since we recorded anything, life in general, but also just very quickly, thanks to everyone who got in touch about if you hadn't seen social media, my dog passed away a few days ago, was put to sleep because of very sudden health issues, so that's been a bit crappy, but thanks for folks reaching out. It's very nice and seeing a lot of people who'd gone through the same kind of stuff, so cheers for that. But back to talking about UFOs, which there is a lot of news and a lot of stuff coming up. A lot of stuff just happened, and some stuff just happened in the past. So we will blitz through as much as we can to get people kind of up to speed. And I'd seen a few people ask about any breakdowns and comments on the news and stuff. So let's get to it. First up, 1 week away, Dan. Well, at most from me recording this, it's the 24th of October. We are 1 week away from the 31st of October. For those of you who are good with your calendars, that should be correct. But the next unclassified UAP Task Force report should be due out. You, as with many other folks, are expecting it by this Friday, aren't you? Which is the 28th of October, yeah, because people tend to release stuff they want buried in news cycles on the Friday before a weekend, and it kind of goes away, doesn't it, and doesn't get discussed until the Monday, unless something else comes and takes over. So we're expecting that to come up, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I would expect it before the weekend. It's due by Monday. Could come out Monday. They could want the weekend to write stuff on it. Travis Taylor was involved in writing the one last year, and I'm sure he has said at some point over the last year he would have loved more time. But this one's going to be interesting because we've had the establishment of a new office, or a rebranding, once again, from, we had the UAP Task Force, then we went to AIMSOG, as they called it, AOI MSG, and now we're on AARO, which is the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. And yeah, so we have a whole new setup, essentially, so it's going to be really curious seeing how much information they've been actually able to pass since that office was established. There's probably a whole bunch of bureaucratic things that have been taking their attention, getting their email set up, getting the computers up and running, getting those home VPNs going. But we do know as well that Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, the head of AARO, has been in touch with various people exploring cases, namely with Avi Loeb and the Ukraine stuff, which we'll talk about in a bit. So it's very active office, but yeah, I'm curious what's going to be in there. I would, at the very least, expect the same as last year in terms of just this is how many reports we've had, this is how many we've solved. But it's going to be curious seeing what's different to last year more than anything, I think.
I think we mentioned this before, but it's worth pointing out that Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick hasn't had that long in role. Again, similar to the last or the initial report, there was a lot of changes made. People like Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon commented how it seemed to hamstring and tie the hands behind their back a little bit in terms of what the finished product would look like. And we've probably had that again this time, because I think he came in, was it around June time? So it's been 4 months of work.
We'd heard rumblings since like maybe March that he was taking the job, but it wasn't announced until about June when the AARO rebranding was announced. But yeah, you're right. Not a lot of time to do work.
No, and again, last time, people like Lou Elizondo, Chris Mellon, and others like Tim McMillan and such were commenting that you really need a run of years at this kind of stuff to start to compile the data and the networking and everything else that would produce results. So again, it's like a restart and back to the beginning. So it's very much the early days. And what we're going to get is a report. And just before we recorded, Dan, you were saying that people are asking for, we're not going to get videos. Well, no, it's a report. It's like handing in a report or an essay at school, isn't it? And your teacher saying, where are the accompanying videos and slides? And you'd be like, well, you asked for a report. I just wrote you out an essay. That's it. So it's a written report. And we're probably going to see maybe some redacted stuff again that like the color in the Shapes, a Foo Fighters album, although
Good
that's
album.
relevant. That is relevant, yeah.
Yeah.
Foo Fighters. Yeah, I absolutely did not mean that either. The shapes on the report of various UAP were completely redacted, as we saw. A lot of kind of conversation happened around that, but you're still talking about a big black rectangle on a page.
Well, that was from FOIA, right? So
yes.
This will be slightly different. We'll have a public facing report with a classified annex. We won't see any of the classified annex, even with stuff blacked out. But the shapes thing is interesting that you bring that up, because then this is my hope for this year, I guess. My pie in the sky hope is that last year they designated 5 categories. 4 of them were man-made prosaic things, natural phenomena, things like that. And then we had the other category. Congress has made it clear through legislation that hasn't passed yet that they're only interested in this other category. So those 4 categories, for me, should become one category of, not interested, basically. And that category for others should expand. That would be my hope, that we'd see, maybe that expand by shapes or by how many observables are present in these anomalous encounters. And as well as that, I'd hope that there would be a bit more talk about cooperation on an international level, because that didn't really happen last year. And, the UK is still very stum. They haven't even responded to our Calvin stuff, even though that photo is now out. And it's a little perturbing that, there's no international cooperation here. As well as that, I'd like to see them name and shame some of the actors who aren't willingly participating in the report and giving over their data, namely the Air Force. Even though we had certain members of the Air Force involved in helping write it, it doesn't seem like they're getting that historical data from them.
No, and I think, God, I'm going to butcher whatever this was going to be, and it could have been a really salient point. Was it Ben Hansen? Ryan Graves on Twitter had commented how there have been cases where airline pilots and crew are still, airline pilots are being again dissuaded or to not come forward, and that's still happening. So you could imagine that goes right through to places like the Air Force and such as well. And again, I've mentioned this recently in some interviews and I think Gary Nolan had mentioned, it's not just as easy for, even with immunity language being written in, that everyone's going to come running forward to talk about the UFO subject, because people have careers and aspirations and their own thoughts and opinions and bias. So it's not just as easy as everyone wants to come forward and talk about UFOs, and there is still a stigma in a lot of different places, in a lot of different in areas. Even with people who are seeing things they can't explain, they don't immediately want to think about the potential of what it could be, and that it will be something likely prosaic. So there's a lot of variables with this, and you're quite right that people, again, I think we'll use that temper their expectations line with this one. And it's one of those, again, go in just expecting the bare minimum, and you might come out pleasantly nonplussed, not even surprised. But I
think so. And it's not, last year there were talk of it being a nothing burger, that there was nothing in the report that was relevant, when actually,
which wasn't true. That wasn't true.
I agree. I think the fact the report's even happening at all is kind of miraculous. And there's been some talk from people like Eric Weinstein in the past week, where he's basically pointing out, whether this is UFOs or a psyop, this is a ridiculously huge story, and it's not clear which way it's going to go yet, but there seems to be a there. That's what we can all agree on.
Maybe worth talking on that quickly then, the Eric Weinstein stuff, because he appeared at San Marino as part of a presentation that was going on. I've seen some folks, if you're not familiar with social media, you might not know Eric Weinstein, because I only know the guy from social media as well. Is he a mathematician by trade? Is that where his background is?
I don't know exactly, but I would say mathematician, physicist. That's what I hold him in my head as.
Clever guy with millions of followers.
Super intelligent guy. And someone who kind of, I would say, spoke out against the establishment as well. So he's kind of been shunned from academic circles. But what he's actually talking about is very often kind of the broader view, instead of just staying in his lane. And we're big fans of people who do that.
He's one of those. And I've seen people comment on the guy's politics and opinions on stuff, and that's all by the by. His Twitter profile now just says "Dad," So yeah, I can't even get anything off of that now. He's changed that, so fair enough.
I like that. Nice
That
human designation.
Yeah, it could be a plea, it could be a role, who knows? So yeah, he's a very clever guy and one of those people that is outside of the UFO subject that you probably want to be involved, or characters like that who can come in and take this topic to a broader subject. He's got 700,000 Twitter followers, so that's no mean feat. So yeah, interesting to see him coming in and talking about the UFO subject. He did meet with Luella Zondo some time ago. They posted a picture together, didn't they, on social media as well. I think he was also, over a year ago, was he not one of the people who talked about being briefed along the time Sam Harris had mentioned, people are reaching out to talk about the UFO subject to personalities and media profiles and media personalities. And there we go. And it might have taken a little bit more time, but all of a sudden he goes from being a healthy skeptic in the subject to, I'm now appearing at the San Marino UFO conference and I'm part of a presentation and talking about, like you say, there is a there. And it's worth getting involved in this subject. And if we can get more and more of that happening, I think that's a huge plus.
It was just amazing to hear his thoughts. The actual circumstances surrounding him being in San Marino, he was going just to watch, basically.
Yeah.
And then, as per Eric's Twitter, he reported that Lou was under the weather, so couldn't go. So we filled a spot, basically. Very Ron Burgundy moment, being asked to play jazz flute. Please, I couldn't. And then he's the most prepared person there.
Yeah. 40-page PowerPoint up his sleeve. Well, I had exactly. With me. Yeah.
And he laid out some interesting thoughts that, like we already said, came down to there's a there. This is hugely intriguing. I'm along for the ride, even if, I'm being used to kind of get this message out. I think this is a really important thing to pay attention to, whether it's because there are visitors in our skies from somewhere else, or because we're being manipulated by an organizational structure that should have a higher bar, quite frankly, and shouldn't be doing this to people. Either way, bigger story.
And you say, just to caveat that, there are visitors in our skies from somewhere else. They might just be not us, but in their own skies. So who knows, just for anyone who follows that particular path, but we could be here all day with that. Just to tag on with that report chatter, D. Dean Johnson, again, fantastic reporting in terms of Senate language. That kind of maybe boring stuff that people might be like, the SA 5950, which I've got written down here, which is the only reason I know it, is the Intelligence Authorization Act. The UAP related text is in there as part of a huge bill. And as of October 12th, I don't think I've seen any updates since then. The UAP language is still in there. And I just wanted you to explain, though. It said that the final UAP language will be written in conference with the House in November. What does that mean, without putting me to sleep?
I'll try my best. In a nutshell, I always use the analogy of train tracks. Basically, the conference is the last stop before this bill is put on the president's desk. So after conference, it will be presented to the president to sign. But conference is where both sides of the aisle, the Republicans and the Democrats, come together and privately kind of hash out the details instead of arguing them in public. That bill will then be presented in the House and voted on. More than likely will just pass once conferences happen, because that's where the details are sorted. They wouldn't present it if they weren't happy with it. Once it's presented and signed off by them, it'll go to the president's desk. So the soonest that can happen is the 14th of November when Congress reconvenes. That'll be when conference starts. So I would probably expect it around Christmas again. You'll see that NDAA HR 7900 passing. I dream in these numbers now. I still remember the ones from years ago.
And largely, though, because so much happens with all of this stuff, and names change and acronyms change with different organizations, and you've got the bill, people can get easily confused. I definitely do. If anyone thinks I don't, for the love of God, when I don't do these regularly, I do get mixed up and all over the place, and that's probably part of the reason these things happen. But this reporting going into the bill, ultimately, what is that going to achieve?
So essentially, there are a few different aspects of the bill this year. We're going to get a do-over of the office, so probably a new name again. The name that's being floated is the UAP Joint Program Office. So a name that properly reflects that it's all of the different organizations coming together. And umbrella-wise, it will actually be kind of held somewhere where those offices can be held accountable instead of kind of policing themselves for it. Mm-hmm. Also in this bill, there is instead of just the aerial phenomena, they're emphasizing the transmedium aspects of it. So the undersea portion is now kind of in the UAP acronym. So that's being emphasized. We've also got language saying that anything that's man-made, they're not interested in. Actually, they're more interested in the anomalous stuff, which is, pretty startlingly clear in terms of whether they're looking for life elsewhere or something else.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the reporting apparatus that they're setting up. So essentially a private channel to whichever UAP task force is there, whatever it's called after this bill passes, where people can submit classified information with no fear of repercussions, essentially. So they can't be fired or lose stars or anything like that. They can just go and start talking about this in private sessions. So that's, I'd emphasize that, because there are a lot of people out there talking about once this bill passes, people can just spill the beans. That's not the case. It'll be private, closed-door sessions, and we'll build from there. As well as that, the comptroller has been directed to go back all the way to Roswell and basically amass a timeline of the intelligence services dealings with UAP since then. So we should expect a huge report from the comptroller at some point detailing where and when exactly all these different projects like Magnet, Blue Book, or Sign, Grudge, or all these different programs over the years. We should get a nice, concise timeline from the US government after all of this.
Yeah, nice. And again, it's what might interest me with that, and there will be loads of UFO researchers out there, people like Grant Cameron who have done decades worth of work and research, and other people like him who would probably say they could do that themselves and tell you from Roswell to now what all those different programs were, what they achieved, what happened. But I think if you get it happening in some sort of official capacity, you don't know what else comes out of that or gets dug up, or you go, we never knew that, or we never knew that was related to that. And, that whole OSAP ATIP thing that at one point seemed like two programs and then became a bit more muddied, and that might happen for something that was 40, 50 years ago, and you start to get some other dots being connected elsewhere. So who knows? I think it's an interesting one. Definitely there's plenty to look forward to with it in terms of the report and the NDAA, what happens with that language, that people again shouldn't expect too much to happen too quickly. Again, if you take a step back and maybe if you listen to the breakdowns from a year or two ago and some of the news at the time, we've come pretty far. And there's a lot of progress happened. I say we, like I've not done it. Other people have done the work in the background.
The report.
No. I'm sure some people think I did, but yeah.
I'll do got until 2026 essentially funded and signed off. So we're playing the long game here, not the short game,
Absolutely. Yeah, there we go, folks. So 3 years worth of content left. So yeah, look forward to it. Speaking of timelines, that's a spurious link. NASA's UFO study has finally come together. They announced some time ago, and I believe their results of that study are going to be announced 1 year from today. Is that right? Was it the 24th?
9 months from today. So
9 months.
The 24th of July, 2023. And it actually launches today as well, as we record this on the 24th. This is when they're rolling up the sleeves and getting to work. So it's a little exciting. It's a watershed moment, maybe.
Yeah, today was a scan, and we'll get the birth of the results in about 9 months' time. Yeah, it's made up of 16 staff members from various backgrounds. I've seen some people online, and we won't go through the whole list of everyone because we're trying to get through a lot of chat here, but people disappointed. There seems to be a lack of UFO experts involved in this, but that's not the point of NASA having their own UFO study, and I can see why they have the people they have involved in this, including some what people may say are kind of hardcore skeptics on the UFO topic, given some of their past comments. Is it astronaut Scott Kelly?
Kelly, yeah.
Yep.
We've also got Nadia Drake, the daughter of Francis Drake of the famous Drake equation.
Mm-hmm.
She's pretty skeptical on this whole thing, but it's interesting that that's where she's coming from. Her dad kind of wrote the book on how to apply science to finding life out there. So it's really intriguing to have her on board.
Do you not think if anything does come of this study, it does mean, do you know what, I'll just give my opinion, it would mean a little bit more to hear something positive come from the mouth of the skeptics like that, and people who did take a more hard-nosed approach to the UFO subject to come out and say, actually, there's more study needs to be done here, or actually we are finding some really interesting data and we need more funding, we need more people involved, and there is something to this, as opposed to a group of really well-known UFO people coming in and saying, yeah, let's keep going, there's definitely something to this, because that's what they want to say.
That's essentially, you'd be building in bias, right? And that's not what we want. We want bunch of data that's really objective, that's really solid, that other scientists can pick up and run with, and that's hopefully what will come from this initial bit of the 9-month study. Is literally just the team identifying how data gathered by civilian government entities, commercial data, and data from other sources can potentially be analyzed to shed light on UAP, and it'll then recommend a roadmap. So we're not going to get to 9 months and have a declaration from NASA that these are real or not. There was a line in the announcement tweets where they basically said there's no evidence this is extraterrestrial, and a number of people push back on that because that can rightly be seen as a conclusion before the study, right? You know, science is science. You shouldn't be making up your mind before you do the study. And David Spergel, who's heading up the study, gave a statement. He said, "I'm entering into the study with an open mind. I am hoping that we will be informing NASA not so much about the nature of the UAPs, but about how to design a program to most effectively understand their nature." That to me sounds like it's a foregone conclusion that they think UAP exist. Mm-hmm. That's kind of, you know, an amazing moment for NASA to say that, like, they exist. We're just kind of advising how to best study them. That's awesome. And rightfully so as well in terms of how to best study them, because all the data we have so far is from tools of war. And Ryan Graves himself spoke about this on the Joe Rogan podcast, where he was saying those FLIR cameras and things like that, they're designed to track enemies in a war zone. These aren't scientific instruments, and that's what we need to bring to bear. So NASA has all these gadgets so they can kind of scientifically do readings and gather data. I'd be really curious to see what NASA can see when they start looking through their data and kind of saying, okay, well, what was going on according to our instruments off the coast of California in November 2004 when Dave Fravor encountered this Tic Tac? Let's have a look. You know, it should come up with some interesting results.
Yeah, 100%. Those pilots in the Navy and stuff aren't out there flying about looking for UFOs as far as we know. They just happen to be encountering them and recording them as best they can on the data that we get to see. And we know they've got better stuff. We know they've got the HD 4K videos, all that good stuff.
Close-ups with mad telescopic lenses.
The beings waving through the window. Hi.
That's a good point, though. It's worth remembering when we talk about like the Ben Hansen Racetrack UAPs coming up, just because commercial airline pilots, when they film these things out the window, they can't just turn their giant planes and go look at this stuff in the sky. They are there to do a job, to look after a cabin full of people. We need a group of people who can go up and with a bunch of scientific instruments and fly towards these things. Hopefully that's what will come from this NASA study. A bunch of people that go, yeah, this is legit. Let's get in a plane and just fly around until we see these things.
Like the UFO equivalent of the movie Twister, where they have the van that flies into the tornado and releases all the little balls. Yeah, there we
go. Would you be on that team?
I would want to be the guy in the truck who was further away watching people doing, you know, like you've said about going to Skinwalker Ranch and how you would camp out, and I'd be the guy in the hotel in Utah, like asking you how your night's going.
Just on walkie-talkie with me.
Yeah, very far away.
Housewife shows and
100%. Yeah, that would be the difference. Yeah. So really interesting stuff. And you wanted to mention on Black Vault's John Greenwald's NASA internal emails on that too.
Oh yeah, just John released a whole tranche of NASA internal communications, which were a whole bunch of different experts kind of trying to pass this subject. And I really recommend people go read it. It's really long, but just kind of have a flick through, and you can see how they're trying to combat their inherent bias by having more than one person present, by having not just skeptics, but also people who are a bit more open-minded. And they all argue and don't take it personally. And I think that was really cool to read. They're passing around essentially articles that, you and I and people in the UFO community have, pored over the past couple of years. And it's really cool to see scientists paying attention to that now and looking through for any nugget of information they can find. Ravi has just teamed up with Ryan Graves as well to launch the AIAA community of interest on UAP, which we'll talk about when we get to it. But there are some NASA scientists who aren't necessarily part of a huge cover-up that's decades long, and they seem to be willing to do the work here.
So from an organization hoping to achieve first contact, we move on to moment of contact. That's a far better link.
Good segue.
Moment of Contact has just been released a few days ago, or almost a week ago now, by director James Fox to pretty overwhelming critical acclaim as far as I can see. We're going to do a full review, record that in the next day or two, and get that released for you for the middle of this week and the end of the week on YouTube. Rumours are, and we'll keep our thoughts about the stuff for the review, but rumours are there are potentially accompanying data and videos to be released soon. James Fox, rumours were he had offered $200,000 for the individual to release the video to him of the alleged being from the Virginia UFO incident in the mid-90s in Brazil. And yeah, more and more. If you look at Ronnie Vernay, a Brazilian journalist on Twitter, he basically said breaking news on this. It was today, actually, just an hour or so ago. After 26 years in silence, researcher Vittorio Paccaccini gave some explosive details about the Virginia beings during a moment of contact premiere. Essentially, he said that there's someone's given them permission to watch 35 seconds of video of the Virginia being in a secret spot. There is the creature in the video. The footage apparently does exist. I'll let you go on and read those yourself, folks. I'll put the link in to Ronnie's tweets. I'll just make a note of that, link to Ronnie's tweets, and be really professional, read that out on the pod. But yeah, I think it's one of those that, spoiler alert, there is no video footage of the being in the documentary, but I think James Fox made that pretty clear throughout the production, especially towards release, that he was trying to attain that. There are now rumours that this video might be there, and that would be absolutely huge if we could get a glimpse into any of that. Even a still frame of that, Dan, could be a pretty big story, couldn't it?
Yeah, it would be a game changer for the documentary for me. You know, one of my favorite things about the documentary, and I'll avoid going too much into it, but it's just the fact that James doesn't conclude. You know, he's there to do an investigation. He's a few times kind of says, you know, if this is true, this is huge. So if they can add something that proves that it's true and that this creature was there and seen by these three girls and transported back to America, that would be the cherry on the cake that suddenly sets this case alight, I would say.
Yeah, and like I say, we'll be releasing our full review. I suggest people do check it out. It's getting fantastic response from people all around the world who have had an interest in this topic and case for some time, since James said he was going to be doing this deep dive into it. It's very, very professionally made. It looks fantastic. And I'll just say, non-spoilery on my part, it's had a far more positive response than I thought it might. And I'll get into those reasons why when we talk about it. You probably know
intriguing.
Some of that.
I could probably guess, but I'm intrigued.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm really glad about that. So yeah, well done to everyone who's watched that as well. So we'll go into that.
Just a quick congratulations to James as well. I've said this before, but you know, when the phenomenon came out, he didn't get to have that on the silver screen and watch it and show people it, and he's really getting his moment with this. So just congratulations, James, and thank you for all your hard work on this. You're doing stellar work.
Yes, well done, James.
If you're listening.
And then, yeah, he's probably not. Next up, some folks who may be listening, another James who might actually, is James Iandoli and J. Christopher King, and potentially Priscilla Stone and Kelly Chase of the UFO Rabbit Hole podcast, Priscilla Stone of Quantum Witch Cafe, James Iandoli of Engaging the Phenomenon YouTube channel, J. Christopher King of the Experiencer Group. I'm sorry, folks. Hopefully I got
basically
all of that
correct.
Yeah. I've just been saying words. Someone listening to this for the first time and who hasn't signed up to Babbel, one of the sponsors, has been like, "What's that guy just said?" Yeah, go back and play it on half speed. All of the above were organisers or hosts of the recent conference held out in New York, an inquiry into anomalous experiences and the phenomenon. It took place on the 8th of October, Dan, which I've got down here last week, but obviously that wasn't last week. It's just been a few weeks. You attended the conference. It's still available to watch on Catch Up as well, headlined by the wonderful Dr. Gary Nolan, with a range of fascinating speakers, including Mitch Horowitz, Darren from Point of Convergence podcast, Dr. Tim Grieve-Carlson, Dr. Sean Esbjorn. Dan, just very quickly, how was the whole experience getting to attend a conference like that, you know, out there in New York and meeting those people?
So, firstly, it was my first time in New York, and thank you, New York. You were amazing. Central Park is probably one of my favorite places
not listening.
on the planet. Yep. They're all listening, all of New York. And yeah, it was really cool. Very cool experience. Got to meet some musicians on the way out there that I got to see play. And if people are listening who are into synchronicities, there was some owl kind of things present throughout my trip, and it was interesting. But yeah, back to the conference. So the day started, and it was just amazing to meet, Priscilla and Kelly and James and Jay. We talk so much on social media, and it's just incredible to be able to just give those guys a massive hug and finally connect in person. Great to see Katie Holland as well. And yeah, we went in and we didn't know what to expect because this was the first event, right? And it was a very small affair. It's not like the conferences that kind of we've been to in the UK where they're kind of huge, maybe 80 to 100 seats in the room, most. Dr. Sean Esbjorn Hagens presented about a study that he's doing, an academic study, where they're looking to take a quantifiable approach to the phenomena. He kind of gave out lists of things that are consistent between experiences, and they're trying to use them as kind of comparable data points to come up with a consistent idea of what's going on. He also mentioned weird owl experiences, which was a crazy one. But yeah, that study's being set up. The data is collated and reflected on. I would say people should reach out to Sean if they feel like their experiences can be part of that study. So yeah, go for that. Dr. Tim Grieve-Carlson's, he went up and he read an excerpt from an upcoming book where he went out to see some spook lights, essentially what we saw in Colombia. And that was really amazing. I'm looking forward to that book. He writes very well. He was involved in religious studies in Rice University, where he helped work on the Archive of the Impossible project with Professor Jeffrey Kripal, who basically, it's an archive of weirdness. If you're into this subject, that's where you should go and have a look. Exo-Academian always puts on a good talk, kind of talking about informed speculation on the subject. The surprise of the day, I would say, was Mitch Horowitz. People don't know a lot about Mitch, but he has a kind of occult background, and he talks a lot about that. But I've been eager for him to get into this field for years because a lot of what he talks about kind of overlaps with the UFO subject. And finally, here he was kind of waxing lyrical about UAP. And he told a story, essentially, that said every Halloween, journalists call him to kind of say, what weird stuff's going on this year, Mitch? Can you tell us if there's movement? And his whole point was there's been a sea change, that this year, finally, when journalists say to him, is there anything to this UFO stuff? Is the mainstream catching on? He can finally say, yes, there's been a change. Yes, the mainstream is catching on, and I don't know where it's going to go. So that was a good fist bump moment, And then, as always, Dr. Gary Nolan knocked it out of the park. His talk was about the language of science and applying it to UAP. He spoke a lot about the Ukraine stuff with Avi Loeb, which we'll touch on. And yeah, he got asked a lot of questions. Jay from Project Unity asked about the Wilson docs, and Gary was kind of saying they're intriguing, but even if you prove that they're real, you can't prove that the contents are real. So yeah, is it worth kind of pulling that thread and focusing all our efforts around it? Which I thought was an interesting point. And yeah, we got to kind of talk outside of those kind of presentations as well. But I'd highly recommend, get a live stream ticket, watch them all. It's well worth your time.
Yeah, and the next event has already been announced for the 3rd of December. And if you haven't seen already, Leslie Kane was one of the first big names announced for it. But Mr. Christopher Mellon, who needs no introduction, has been announced for that one as well. I can promise you he is not there for the money. As you know, Chris Mellon is from a very wealthy family, like billionaires. And he is not attending those conferences. So that's a really good get for James and Jay, and I'm made up for them because that's someone that a lot of people I know want to see speaking on the topic. And he usually does a lot of his work behind the scenes, Chris Mellon, very much exclusively behind the scenes. So it's good to see him stepping out into public for that conversation. So yeah, I know James and Jay both messaged in the last couple of days they're going to come back on nearer the time to talk about the conversation, talk about the conference and what can be expected. And Mitch Horowitz, I was speaking to a few weeks ago via DM. He's going to come onto the podcast as well in the near future. So hopefully that one will be arranged for November. So will Leslie Kane for November as well. Good to finally get Leslie on, and a few others. But yeah, just some of those guests are just kind of lining up nicely to talk about various different things as well. So
it was a cool standout moment in New York for me. Jay looked at me at one point and said, "Hey Dan, would you mind going outside and just going to the queue? Leslie Kane's in the queue. Do you want to just grab her and bring her inside?" And my brain kind of fritzed, just walking out to fetch Leslie, and we had a lovely chat. She was genuinely just such a nice person.
Yeah. Again, I won't make that one, folks. It's Christmas, young family, kids. It's a lot of money still to get to New York at this time of year. But hopefully, sometime next year, I can get out there for one of James and Jay's conferences. If you can and you're in the area, definitely attend. Otherwise, get a live stream ticket. I saw someone on Twitter had very kindly said that they would donate 5 live stream tickets for folks just because they were in a good place in life and could afford to do that, which I thought was very nice as well. So that was very cool of them. But yeah, if you can, folks, I think is it $25 for a live stream ticket?
25 at the moment, usually 30, but I think there's an early discount.
Early bird for various accents in there is available as well. So check out James Indoley or J. Christopher King's Twitter feeds for those discounts and stuff as well.
I will also be out in New York for the next event. So just like with my previous one, I covered, I posted a lot of social media as I was out there kind of experiencing this stuff. So follow me at The Signal on Instagram or Twitter, and you'll kind of see some of those as they're happening.
Or just follow him if you see him.
Or just follow them, yeah.
He sometimes drops gummy sweets behind him. You can kind of follow and pick up. Also, I'd suggest follow, if you're on social media, at Inquiry Anomalous. Now, check the spelling of that, because I messaged James just checking he had spelt anomalous incorrectly, but he actually was a character short on spelling it the right way, so I had to go with anomalous. So it is... Yeah, you'll see the spelling of it is correct, but yeah, make sure you're following that one. I don't even know, Dan, if you had checked that out and saw that, but yeah, I checked with James Indoley. I was like, you've spelled anomalous wrong, and he was like, yeah, we were a character short. So
it was on purpose. Anomalous spelling for the word. I would just be like, that's a pun.
Yeah, a letter had to go, and it was the O. So yeah, there we go. There's a slogan. But yeah, so that was a lot of the news, and I want to get through some other bits and pieces in quick fire format because I'm a bit short of time today, just getting back into this, and hopefully I've not sounded manically depressed after the kind of weekend I had. But a few
you sound
things.
Beautiful.
Oh, thanks. Shut up. A few things worth touching on. Some of you asked me to discuss a few different things with Dan. The first one is the Mars Rover shot. So there was is it a Gigapan or something it's called, which the Mars Rover takes pictures of the Mars landscape. Usually you see all kind of interesting or sometimes just shots of kind of browny red desert. However, there is, if you check the link in the description or various different accounts, there is a particular shot where something seems to be in the sky. All I'm going to say on this one is it could be something, it could be nothing. Many I know would say it's an artifact or a glitch. It doesn't appear in the next frame, which to many would indicate something was in the sky and then wasn't. And as we know, there shouldn't be anything in the sky of Mars, depending on your persuasion on a UFO topic. But I think it's one of those that if NASA, who are in charge of this rover, come out and basically say, oh yeah, it was nothing, half the people will believe them and half of them won't. I don't think there is really any way, is there, Dan, to address the artifact, because it's just one single point of a picture and the quality is such that you can't really zoom in on it unless it just becomes a big pixelated blob. I mean, do you want to comment much more on it? I'd love it to be something. I'd love it to be an alien spacecraft flying about.
I zoomed in and I could see them waving. No, I zoomed in. I had a look at some of the frames either side of it. If it was a camera artifact, i.e., part of the sensor was dying, it would be present in all of them. It could have been something kicked up by one of the wheels of the rover, but it doesn't travel too fast, so probably not that. But yeah, it's curious. But without a time machine, without a tic tac, we physically cannot go there and see what it was. Even if it's a fly, if in this situation, usually you get McWest kind of saying, that's a fly, that's a bug. If bugs are present on Mars flying in front of the cameras,
Martian fly.
That's huge, right?
Yeah.
So, it could still be something prosaic, but incredible. More data, as always.
So are you leaning towards, though, regardless, that there is something in the picture, as opposed to it being an issue with the camera?
Yeah, I would say I'm leaning towards there being something there. We've seen pictures of, maybe fungal formations on Mars, of things moving, things present in one photo and then not in another photo, not moving because we didn't have film. But yeah, there certainly seems to be a growing kind of idea that there is life on Mars. But when we say that, we're not talking little green men or gray men. We're more talking, bacterial or bugs or something like that.
Yeah. David Bowie had a great song, Life on Mars.
Great one.
He did. Brian Graves, pilot extraordinaire, was on Joe Rogan podcast recently. Dan, I've only seen the highlights of it, to be honest. Ryan Graves speaks incredibly well. I have asked Ryan to come on the podcast before. He's a busy man and he's got some other things going on. So polite decline from him, which is totally understandable. But yeah, he went on to Joe Rogan He wasn't too busy for Rogan, was he? But that's fine. I'm sure Joe Rogan puts on a far better spread than I could offer. And it's great to have someone like Ryan Graves. If he was going to give one interview, do it on Joe Rogan's podcast, because that's the platform to discuss this topic on, I think, on a mass scale, to get folks interested, and all that good stuff trickles down to the lower levels like ourselves. So yeah, he spoke really well, talked about his encounters, experiences, and for me, one of the kind of standouts was he didn't mind too much doing a little bit of speculation on the possibility of some of these encounters being a non-human intelligence. And it's nice again to hear someone like that just being able to say that out there in a public forum to millions of people viewing and listening around the world. Yeah.
He's someone reputable, like you say. He's an expert, and it kind of, the interview stacks on top of the one Ryan did with Lex Fridman. I would say, they're a good 1-2. Listen to them both. With Lex, they talked about Ryan's experience as a fighter pilot for a lot of it, and that was amazingly informative. But pretty much straight from the get-go in this one, they're talking about UAP. He recounts a number of things, and there were a few quotes that I just picked out. One which I've mentioned already was where Ryan was saying that an F-18 isn't an analytical tool, it's a tool of war, and we need proper scientific instruments kind of directed at these UAP that we're finding. Second was that he pointed out that the shape that we're seeing in the gimbal video, that's the shape of the energy that the object is emitting. So when we're talking about it being a spinning top based on the shape of the gimbal in the video, it's probably not a spinning top. That's not how it looks. We're not seeing the shape there. So there's a whole bunch of, graphic artists out there that just kind of went, back to the drawing board then. And I thought that was interesting. He also stated he believes there's a pathway for declassification of data so that scientists can help understand it, which was interesting. That would have been something I would have liked to have followed up on more, why Ryan has that impression. And then the final one that I'd like to highlight is that at one point he said they were talking about politicians and how, if aliens came down, if visitors came down, they would go see the president or something. That's what we assume. But Ryan quite rightly pointed out, if we find an ant colony in a garden, do we make ourselves available to meet the queen of the hive? No. So it was a really good analogy for kind of saying, we think of everything in terms of politics, but something coming here wouldn't. And it's a testament to all these kind of school landings and things like that we always see happening.
Do you know what? Can I just say on that point, people might be listening to this and thinking, yeah, but that's what I think anyway, that, why would they come down here? The point being, and what we're trying to say is, Ryan Graves is saying this to 3 or 4 million people, most of which don't have that deep an interest in the UFO subject. And it just makes them think that one line, especially something like that, for me, makes people go, I never thought about it that way. Maybe I should look at this slightly differently. And that for me is the big thing with these sorts of interviews.
That's where I kind of, similar to Nope, the movie, that's where I took from that they put in this other idea of what these things could be in front of millions of people that don't
like a living organism.
It's just like, okay, well, let's think a little outside the box here. Maybe it's not just something coming from another planet visiting. Ryan also posted the other day, I think it was October 19th, that the AIAA community of interest has launched. I mentioned this earlier, but basically they want to help. The community of interest is to study the unidentified aerial phenomena and educate government, academia, and industry on aerospace safety. So he's working with Ravi Kopparapu, who's a planetary scientist at NASA and is included in those emails that John Greenwald got from NASA. So if you want to find out what he kind of thinks of the subject, have a look through there. But they have 3 teams. There's the human factor, the outreach factor, and the hardware factors. So they'll be looking at the hardware. That'll be a very neutral point. Then there's outreach, which is pretty much what it sounds like. The subject matter experts talking to people who are interested in a scientific engineering way. And then you've got the human factors, which engages with scientific and engineering research community to assist with educating the aerospace community relative to the aerospace safety factors with UAP. So it's all about air safety, basically. And that's what we're seeing addressed as well with Ben Hansen and what's going on with him and the Racetrack UAPs.
And is it fair to say, Dan, we've only got a few minutes left, but people complained about the threat narrative being used in official capacity by folks like Lou Elizondo, but it did get the military involved and the Navy involved in a way they weren't before in the UFO subject. So as much as people might be, the AIAA stuff, that's not really UFO related, and talking about air safety, but you might get organizations interested in the UFO subject indirectly because you go with their their example of a threat narrative. Air safety is really important. Oh, is it? Yeah, okay, well, that's true. So we have to look at something that may be affecting that, which is unidentified aerial phenomenon, or UFOs, as you might know them, and it just gets them into that conversation a different way. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say that's precisely the right way to think about it. People are coming because there's a there, not because they agree that they're aliens, but I don't really care if they agree with, my thinking that it's something else and something other. The fact is they're looking at it, and that's more than we've ever had in this subject, looking at it with an actual open mind. And when they say about threats, it doesn't necessarily mean, as Stephen Greer would assert, that they're, coming down and blowing us up with these special bombs that they have. It just means that it could be a threat to air safety, because there are genuinely some examples where commercial pilots have swerved to avoid these things, drop their plane hundreds of feet in seconds, and some passengers have been injured and gone to hospital afterwards. It is a safety issue. And if these things can fly right through jets, we kind of need to know that, so we know not to swerve,
Okay, you've got 30 seconds on each of the next topics I want to discuss, of which there are 4. Okay, and I'm going to time you on them as well.
Okay.
And both of us have the 30 seconds between us. Stephen Greer, who you mentioned, was on the Theory of Everything podcast. Dan, you were on that with Curt. Curt Jaimungal, of course. People, if you haven't checked that one out, go and check it out. Curt's done a variety of UFO-related interviews. It was a pretty mixed response from folks online. The online community, the UFO community anyway, is quite vocal against Stephen Greer. Well, the ones who don't like him anyway. So they were always going to shout the loudest about this. Stephen Greer, I've shared my thoughts on many times. I think he was someone 20 years ago, had maybe the right intentions with the subject. And then God knows all the stuff that's gone on since then. But his arms got bigger and so did his ego. And you can't necessarily blame that, to be fair. But I think if you've not seen Curt Jaimungal's style, it can clash wildly with people like Stephen Greer and Linda Moulton Howe, because he usually does really fascinating, in-depth and intellectual talks on physics and, quantum physics and mathematics and, some really, really niche subjects with some very, very interesting and very intelligent individuals. And then he gets on a Stephen Greer who claims to be some of these things, but when he's asked or pressed on, let's talk about physics, because I'm classically trained in physics, as Curt told him, and Stephen went, oh, no. Yeah, it's like, that was your chance, Dr. Greer, to, really get into it, and you didn't. So there's been some fantastic UFO interviews done by Curt. There's been some ones that have been a little bit more awkward or car crashy. See Linda Moulton Howe, who stormed off at the end, which was a shame and really no fault of Curt's.
Ruined a birthday.
Yeah, it did, yep. And then you've got the one where Stephen Greer's gone on, and largely to promote something he had coming up, but which is what he was doing.
Yeah, it was very, if anyone watches it, for the first hour, Curt and I were messaging each other saying, get a question, because Greer, clearly, you asked how come he was doing this one interview, and he's notoriously hard to get on podcasts. And then he just spoke for a long time, and it was a lot, I'll say that. But I was glad that I was there, because when it got quite awkward, it meant that there was someone else to kind of step in and direct the conversation elsewhere. And that was specifically where Curt was pushing Greer on the physics of it and kind of saying, you don't need to play coy with this audience. This audience is the audience who's into the physics, so speak as much as you want.
Yeah.
It became very apparent that Greer didn't really understand what he was saying. Some of the words he was using, and that's fine if you don't. Not all of us are physicists, but at that point is where you'd expect someone to just put their hands up and say, I don't know, I'm not the person that has made this free energy device that he was talking about, so I can't enlighten you. We got to speak about Tom DeLonge, why they fell out. I got to ask Stephen about flares as well, several times actually, and the answer there was that there are people messing with them, and other actors might have dropped the flares, which, to be honest, I don't believe, because there are receipts essentially pointing to Stephen Greer's company in doing this. But for me, there was a really nice bit of feedback I got about the whole thing. So not just that Stephen Greer called Justin Bieber Justice Beaver, but also that someone said to me that they really wanted, going into the interview, they wanted it to be a gotcha interview to kind of show Stephen up. And they said that when the interview finished, they realized that doing a gotcha interview isn't very insightful, and that it was a lot more informative to see people let Stephen say his piece and give his answers. And now they have a better idea of who Stephen Greer is. And I would say the mask dropped during that interview a bit. So yeah, people should go watch it. It might inform them as to maybe if they should even be listening to what Stephen Greer has to say.
Yeah, go on and check that one out. On the podcast next week is Dr. Stephen Greer with his fascinating new documentary. No, I'm joking. He's not coming on. He never gets back to me. So yeah, there you go. Go on, folks. And as always, make up your own mind on Dr. Greer. I know many of you are big fans of his, and that's absolutely fine. That's it. I'm not as much, but yeah.
Just emphasize that even if you don't agree with Dr. Greer, stuff like CE5, human-initiated contact, goes way back before him.
Yeah.
So, by Fui what Dr. Greer is saying and what he's become over the past years, that's not a reflection on the subject itself.
We've gone way over 30 seconds on that one.
We have,
sorry. You know what? Some of his documentary stuff is okay, bits of it. Very quickly, George Knapp had a piece on 8 News where he works out in Las Vegas on Radiance Technologies. They're a company that is employee-owned, ties to Travis Taylor and Jay Stratton, who famously, Travis Taylor was a chief scientist in the UAP Task Force, wrote the report. They have offices within Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and Nellis Air Force Base. The big takeaway from this, folks, was the president of Radiance Technologies is one Tim Tinsley, who has kind of worked his way up to be the president of said company. And a lot of people were jumping on his comment that they wouldn't shy away from getting involved with UFO or UAP related contracts. I think you can take the line with a little bit of a pinch of salt, because if you see the interview, and I'll put the link to it on the description, he's sort of asked the question, but you don't get to see him being asked the question, and he does that. Sure, yeah, we would get involved in UFO related contracts. Why not? We're a private contractor. You would want to. It'd be cool. It's very throwaway, and he's just being honest that we'd get involved, but yeah, I don't think there was too much to it. But what it did highlight is, again, the CV of Travis Taylor, which I always think it's fascinating more and more that the Skinwalker Ranch TV series almost seems detrimental through no fault of their own to the character of Travis Taylor, yet people forget the kind of genius behind the man, because his qualifications and academic background speak for themselves. Dan, you've got 5 seconds.
I agree.
Yeah, brilliant. This 30 second thing's went really badly. I just want to touch on a couple of things, literally a few lines each, and we won't get to the bit at the end, but that's fine. Avi Loeb had commented on UAPs above Ukraine, saying there's pretty prosaic explanations for them, Dan. This disappointed some people, but what were your thoughts?
Just that, you can feel free to disagree with Avi. I'm sure he'd welcome it if you presented that disagreement in the language that he knows, which is a peer-reviewed paper. Avi's written a paper, he's put it out. You can disagree with it, but you need the data to back it up. So, for example, he thinks that actually it's probably artillery shells. You could object on the shape of some of these objects, or maybe the fact that this study was done really early, so the war might have not kicked off and there wouldn't have been artillery flying around. But the point is, you need to speak his language, and that's where we have scientists coming in and kind of grappling over it. That Avi doesn't think it's bad to be wrong. He thinks it's bad to not investigate something. So he's just putting his assertions out so that they can be discussed.
Yeah. And also, very quickly, we'll just finish on this one. The Ben Hansen Racetrack UAP reports. Ben Hansen done a special update a few weeks ago on the podcast, thanks to Ben, on some pilots' sightings that were filmed, and also the audio was released of as well, which was really cool. Ben Hansen's been following this up, and he's getting reports from pilots all the way from Japan to the US and other areas as well. I just really enjoy seeing that kind of boots on the ground actual work, Dan, which can be a bit dirty at times, and people like yourself who are, you can call yourself a proper researcher now because you went to Columbia and you'd done some research.
You've said it. I'm quoting you.
No, but it's true. It's just I stick to facts, and that's it. Like yourself and Vinny and all the crew that done that, you went and researched something, and whether the final product is what some people were happy with or not, you went and researched it. These pilots may or may not be seeing something worth investigating, but unless they actually go and investigate it, unless people like Ben do the work and go, let's actually see what this could be. Let's go speak to these pilots. Let's go find the video. Let's go and do some stuff, as opposed to just sitting online and saying, yes, it is, or no, it's not. Then, you have to applaud the work people like Ben are putting into this as well. So,
yeah, I completely agree. And Ben would be the first person to say, I don't know what these are. I just want to help figure it out. It's the same with the pilots that are seeing them. They're not saying that they're aliens. And that's the accusation that's being levied against them. This is the kind of work we need to be doing if we want to move forward in this subject, not making conclusions on limited data, but just investigating, because like we always say, there's likely to be a lot of different things that are causing these sightings. It's not just going to be one thing.
Cool. Just to finish up, folks, Dan, I hate to ask you to make conclusions on limited data, but based on what you've seen with these reports from Ben Hansen, yes or no, are these pilots seeing alien-piloted spacecraft?
Absolutely, they are.
Folks, at the start of this year, I got a bit of a health scare, and it kick-started me to getting fitter, healthier, and generally looking after myself better. A healthier breakfast was high on my priority list, and it should be for you too. Magic Spoon is the perfect way to get in your morning protein, eating cereal that tastes like it did when you were a kid without all the bad stuff. I can promise you there is nothing unidentified in this cereal. The variety pack has 4 flavours including cocoa, fruity, frosted and peanut butter. This pack has 0 grams of sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein and only 4 net grams of carbs. There are only 140 calories per serving. It's keto friendly, gluten free, grain free, soy free and low carb. It's delicious but super healthy cereal that really brings joy to your mornings, afternoons or actually any time of day. Go to magicspoon.com/thatUFO to grab a variety pack and try it today. Be sure to use our promo code THATUFO at checkout to save $5 off your order. Magic Spoon is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 100% happiness guarantee, so if for any reason you don't like it, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to get your delicious bowl of guilt-free cereal at magicspoon.com/thatUFO and use that code THATUFO to save $5 off. Thank you, Magic Spoon, for sponsoring this episode. That is all for this week's show. Thank you very much for listening. Please remember to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. You can like, retweet and subscribe. That would all be very much appreciated. The shows are being uploaded onto YouTube as we speak more and more. You can sign up at patreon.com/thatUFO podcast to access the shows ad-free as well. Please get in touch on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, That UFO Podcast. Of course, on Twitter, it's at UFO UAPAM. And again, folks, as always, keep looking up. You never know what you might see.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little around. Meditative game of state full on meta. You can't imagine how it could have been any better. I got to the top of the stairs and there he was. Like, you awake? I was about to abduct you, cuz. I jumped back and nearly kissed myself, and I climbed out the window after the elf, and I woke up in my bed and there was something on my head and everything was weird and everything was red. I called out to my boys, they thought this was noise, they thought it was a dream, they thought it was my toys, they thought it was my problems, and they think I should seek therapy, and I don't know what to do because it doesn't really scare me. If you really want to know who I think I be, I think it's you and me and us and we and him and her and that and she and that thing over there and what's that, Jay? But for being serious, open your mind, consider your heart, consider time, consider your space, consider your lies, consider your life.